The wind, a razor-edged phantom, screamed through the city canyons, each gust laden with ice. Arthur's own breath plumed white, then was snatched away as he knelt in the deepening snow. His every joint protested, a chorus of old pains amplified by the brutal cold. He was already freezing, his body having surrendered its meager warmth hours ago. But the small, trembling form before him, that was a coldness that threatened to extinguish life itself. He fumbled with the buttons of his threadbare army jacket, his fingers clumsy, numb. This jacket, his last, his only shield against a world that had long forgotten him. He was giving it away. A small girl, Lily, no more than 6 years old, lay listless in her mother's arms, her skin a terrifying, waxy blue beneath a layer of street grime. A broken toy soldier, its painted smile cruelly intact, was clutched in her tiny, frozen hand. Arthur's heart seized. As he draped the worn fabric over the child, a silent, obsidian Rolls-Royce, a vessel of impossible warmth and wealth, purred to a halt mere feet away. Inside, cocooned in sable, Eleanor Ainsworth stared, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with a disbelieving shock that pierced through her own cocoon of grief. What she witnessed in that moment of raw, desperate sacrifice would shatter her world and rebuild it anew. Arthur's days were a relentless cycle of survival. He navigated the city's unforgiving streets, a ghost in worn boots, his face a testament to a life lived hard. Etched with the lines of worry, the scars of forgotten skirmishes, both military and civilian. Home was a shifting concept, a sheltered doorway, a park bench in the fleeting mercy of a weak sun, or the stifling anonymity of a crowded shelter on the rare nights he could secure a cot. His old army jacket was his most prized possession, more than just tattered fabric. It was a repository of memories, the scent of distant lands, the camaraderie of brothers in arms, the phantom weight of a rifle on his shoulder. It was a tangible link to a time when he had a name, a purpose, a place. Now, it was primarily a shield against the elements, often the only thing between him and the bone-deep chill of the streets. The war had ended decades ago, but for Arthur, the battle for dignity, for a flicker of warmth, was a daily engagement. Yet, beneath the gruff exterior, a resilient ember of kindness persisted. He'd share a scavenged half-sandwich with a stray dog, his voice, usually raspy, softening into a gentle murmur. He'd use his fading strength to help an elderly woman hoist her groceries, disappearing before she could offer more than a startled, "Thank you." These were not grand gestures, but quiet affirmations of humanity he refused to let be extinguished. Loneliness was his constant shadow, a vast, echoing emptiness that the bustling city only amplified. He often wondered if anyone truly saw him, if the sacrifices he'd made long ago held any meaning in this fast-paced, indifferent world. A quiet desperation gnawed at him, a longing for connection, for a sign that his existence still mattered. In another part of the city, within the opulent, silent walls of a sprawling mansion, Eleanor Ainsworth existed in a state of suspended grief. Her husband, Richard, a man whose vibrant spirit and boundless generosity had been the sun in her sky, was gone. His death had left a void that wealth and privilege could not fill. Richard had been a titan of industry, but his true passion, his legacy, was his fervent dedication to philanthropy. He had poured millions, and more importantly, his heart, into various charitable endeavors. Now, Eleanor was a reluctant steward of this empire of goodwill. She presided over board meetings, signed enormous checks, and attended fundraisers, each event a hollow echo of Richard's passionate engagement. The mansion, once filled with his laughter and their shared dreams, now felt like a museum of her sorrow, each objet d'art a painful memento. Lately, one of Richard's projects had consumed her thoughts, a cutting-edge research initiative he'd founded, dedicated to combating a rare and aggressive childhood illness known as acute promyelocytic leukemia, modified APLM. He'd spoken of it with an almost desperate fervor, driven by a sorrow they both knew intimately, a private tragedy that had shaped their lives. Eleanor often found herself in Richard's study, surrounded by his notes, his ambitious plans, the palpable energy of his unfinished work. She felt the weight of his unfulfilled dream, but the path forward seemed shrouded in her own persistent fog of loss. She missed his guiding hand, his infectious optimism. The world Richard had tried so hard to heal felt distant, its problems abstract, until the storm broke. The blizzard arrived not as a gentle dusting, but as a declaration of war by winter. It descended with savage fury, a white maelstrom that paralyzed the city. Winds howled like banshees, driving snow into impenetrable drifts, transforming familiar landmarks into alien, hostile territory. For Arthur, the storm was a direct assault. His usual makeshift shelters offered no defense against its ferocity. The cold, his old, familiar enemy, became a relentless predator, its icy fangs sinking deep. He trudged through the blizzard, each step in agony, seeking any sliver of refuge from the wind's merciless bite. That same evening, Eleanor was being driven home from a charity gala. The glittering affair, intended to celebrate philanthropy, had only deepened her sense of detachment. The polite applause and champagne toast felt obscene against the backdrop of the raging storm outside and the gnawing emptiness within. Her mind drifted to Richard's APLM Foundation, to the faces of the children in the brochures, children fighting for their lives. An old, familiar ache tightened her chest, the memory of their own daughter, Emily, lost too soon to that very same cruel disease. The city lights blurred through the snow-streaked limousine window, a distorted reflection of her own inner turmoil. Driven by the primal urge of survival, Arthur stumbled down a narrow, refuse-strewn alleyway, hoping the towering brick walls might offer some respite from the shrieking wind. And there, huddled against the frigid stone, cowering from the storm's fury, he saw her, a young woman, her face a mask of desperate anxiety, trying to shield an even smaller figure bundled in her arms. It was the child who seized Arthur's attention. Lily, so small, so fragile, her breaths were shallow, ragged gasps punctuated by violent, racking cough that seemed to tear through her tiny frame. Her skin, where it peeked from beneath a thin, inadequate blanket, was an alarming ashen blue. In one small, mittened hand, she clutched a battered wooden soldier, its paint chipped, one arm dangling uselessly. Arthur's weary heart clenched with a painful thud. He knew that look, the shadow of mortality creeping into young eyes. He'd seen it too many times on battlefields far away. To witness it now, in the heart of his own city, on the face of a child, was an almost unbearable agony. The mother, Sarah, looked up as he approached, her eyes wide, reflecting a terrifying mix of fear, exhaustion, and utter despair. In that instant, Arthur's own gnawing hunger, the brutal cold that was systematically stealing his strength, receded into insignificance. All he saw was Lily, her small chest laboring for each precious breath, the unnatural flush on her cheeks warring with a deathly pallor. He didn't need a medical degree to recognize the signs of severe illness compounded by acute hypothermia. He looked down at his jacket, the familiar weight of it, the worn fabric a trusted companion for so many desolate years. It was his fortress, his history, arguably the only thing of tangible value he possessed in the world. To remove it now, to expose his already chilled body to the full, unrestrained violence of the blizzard, it was a risk that could very well be his last. His aging body was already at its limit. But then his gaze fell again on Lily's small, chapped lips, tinged with that ominous blue, and the decision was no longer a decision. It was an imperative. There was no alternative, not for a man who had once sworn to protect the innocent. His fingers, stiff and aching with cold, fumbled with the stubborn buttons. The moment the jacket came open, The wind sliced into his exposed torso like 1,000 tiny knives, sending a violent shiver through his entire frame. He gritted his teeth against the shock of it, kneeling in the snow, which instantly soaked to the thin fabric of his trousers. He gently, carefully, wrapped his heavy army jacket around Lily's frail form. It enveloped her like a massive, protective cocoon. "Here, little soldier," he rasped, his voice hoarse but surprisingly tender. "This'll keep the enemy at bay." He then remembered the small, dented thermos tucked inside his inner pocket. It contained a few mouthfuls of lukewarm, weak tea he'd managed to acquire earlier. Not much, but it was something warm. He offered it to Sarah. For her, if she can take it. Might help a little. Sarah, who had instinctively tensed, ready to defend her child from this disheveled stranger, watched his actions with stunned, almost reverent disbelief. Her initial fear began to dissolve, replaced by a dawning, overwhelming realization. This man, this forgotten soul who looked as though he possessed nothing, was offering them his everything. She saw past the grime, the scars, the haunted look in his eyes, and perceived the raw, unvarnished compassion that softened his rugged features. Hot, sudden tears welled, spilling down her ice-cold cheeks, freezing almost instantly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion too profound for simple gratitude. "Oh, God bless you, thank you." Her hand trembled violently as she took the thermos, trying to coax a few precious drops between Lily's pale lips. It was at this exact moment that Eleanor Ainsworth's chauffeur, Charles, a man of impeccable skill and quiet discretion, was forced to bring the Rolls-Royce to a smooth halt. A jackknifed lorry a few blocks ahead had choked the street, the blizzard turning a minor incident into a major snarl. The limousine stopped directly at the mouth of the alleyway. Eleanor, still lost in her somber reflections on Richard's legacy and their shared sorrow, glanced idly out the window, and then she saw them. The scene imprinted itself on her mind with the stark clarity of a flash photograph. The grizzled veteran, his thin shirt now exposed to the raging storm, his arms bare, kneeling in the swirling snow. The small, desperately ill child, now wrapped in that man's oversized, tattered coat. The anguished mother, her face a portrait of despair. The broken toy clutched in a tiny hand. The raw, unshielded humanity of it all, starkly illuminated by the indifferent, flickering glow of a distant streetlight, struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Her gloved hand flew to her pearls, a reflexive gesture of profound shock. Her breath hitched. The child, so pale, so still, it was like seeing a ghost of her own Emily. This tableau of acute suffering and astonishing, selfless kindness sliced through years of carefully constructed emotional armor, touching a nerve so deep, so tender. She thought it had long since died. Eleanor couldn't look away. "Charles," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm's howl. "Just wait here for a moment. Don't move." Charles, who had served the Ainsworth family for over 30 years and had witnessed a share of Mrs. Ainsworth's quiet melancholies and occasional unconventional impulses, merely inclined his head, though his own gaze flickered with concerned curiosity towards the desperate scene unfolding in the alley. Eleanor watched, transfixed, as Arthur, now visibly trembling, his lips tinged with a disturbing shade of blue, began to gather sodden pieces of discarded cardboard. He meticulously propped them against a grimy brick wall, attempting to construct a pitifully inadequate windbreak around Lily and Sarah. He spoke to them in low, reassuring tones, his words stolen by the wind before they could reach Eleanor, but the gentle cadence, the protective posture, spoke volumes. He then turned his attention back to Lily, his gaze softening as he noticed a broken toy soldier still clutched in her limp hand. "What's his name, little one?" Arthur asked, his voice surprisingly gentle, a counterpoint to the storm's fury. Lily, weak and drifting in and out of consciousness, murmured something unintelligible, her eyelids fluttering. Arthur carefully took the toy from her grasp. "He looks like he's seen some heavy fighting," he observed, examining the snapped wooden arm with a practiced eye. From a deep pocket in his trousers, he retrieved a small, well-worn penknife. With fingers that were surely aching and clumsy from the cold, he began to whittle with surprising dexterity at the broken edges of the toy, attempting a crude but careful repair. It was a tiny gesture in the face of such overwhelming adversity, yet it was an act of profound tenderness, a desire to mend, to soothe, to bring even a fractional moment of comfort to a child on the brink. Sarah, her initial shock giving way to a desperate need to share her unbearable burden, began to speak, her words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and exhaustion. "Her name is Lily," she choked out, her voice trembling uncontrollably. She has APLM. The doctors, they said it's so aggressive. We came to the city. There's a specialist, a Dr. Ramsey. He offered a slim chance, a new experimental trial, but we ran out of money for the lodging. The shelters were all full tonight because of the storm, and then she just crashed. She's burning with fever, but she's so terribly cold." Her voice finally broke on a ragged sob. "I don't know what to do. I think my baby is dying. APLM, acute promyelocytic leukemia, modified." The acronym, innocuous the most, struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, echoing in the sudden, roaring silence of her mind. It was the same, the exact, rare, devastating illness that had stolen her own precious Emily so many years ago. The illness Richard had dedicated the final years of his life, and a significant portion of his fortune, to fighting. The sheer, stark coincidence was so staggering, so deeply personal. It felt as if the universe itself had conspired to bring her to this very spot, at this very moment. It felt like Richard, reaching out from beyond the veil, guiding her. She watched Arthur, his face now a mask of grim concentration as he focused on mending the toy soldier, his own body succumbing to violent, uncontrollable shivers. He was clearly in distress, yet his entire being seemed focused on offering solace to the child. The chasm between his selfless, life-risking sacrifice and her own existence of insulated, gilded comfort yawned before her, a stark and painful indictment. The glittering gala, the expensive jewels, the echoing, empty rooms of her mansion, it all felt utterly meaningless, a hollow charade compared to this raw, elemental display of human empathy playing out in a frozen, forgotten alleyway. The toy soldier, too, resonated with an almost unbearable poignancy. Emily had cherished a similar wooden doll, its arm perpetually loose, a beloved, quirky imperfection. The sight of Lily's broken toy and Arthur's gentle, almost reverent attempt to mend it, unlocked a floodgate of memories Eleanor had kept fiercely barricaded for decades. The image of Arthur, offering his last shred of protection, his own life visibly ebbing in the face of the storm, seared itself onto her soul. This wasn't charity. This was sacrifice. This was love in its most primal, unadorned, and powerful form. A profound, seismic shift occurred within Eleanor. It was as if a glacier encasing her heart for 2 decades had suddenly, violently cracked. She could no longer remain a passive, privileged observer in her warm, luxurious cocoon. The sight of Lily, so small, so fragile, fighting the very same insidious monster that had claimed her own beloved child, was an undeniable, irresistible call to action. The old pain was still there, sharp and visceral, but now it was fused with fierce, unexpected surge of protectiveness, of urgent, undeniable purpose. "Charles," she said, her voice no longer distant and melancholic, but imbued with a new, steely resolve that surprised even herself. "Open my door. Now." Charles, ever loyal, hesitated for only the briefest fraction of a second, a flicker of concern for her safety in his eyes. But he obeyed. The moment the heavy door swung open, the icy wind, laden with stinging pellets of snow, assaulted Eleanor, snatching her breath away. Her expensive fur coat suddenly felt like a flimsy shield against the raw, untamed power of the storm. She pulled it tighter, the ermine soft against her chin, and stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, her elegant heels sinking into the treacherous snow. Carefully, resolutely, she made her way towards a small, desperate huddle in the alley. Sarah looked up, startled, her eyes widening in alarm at the sudden appearance of this impeccably dressed, wealthy woman emerging from such an opulent car. She instinctively drew Lily closer, a flicker of innate distrust, born of hardship, crossing her face. Arthur, too, struggled to straighten his shivering frame, instinctively positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah and Lily, a silent, albeit visibly weakening guardian. He didn't know who this woman was or what she wanted, but his ingrained protective instincts, honed on battlefields and hardened by life on the streets, took over. Eleanor stopped a few feet away, her heart hammering against her ribs, the cold of shocking, brutal reality against her exposed face. She could taste the metallic tang of the frozen air. I saw you," she began, her voice trembling, not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming gravity of the moment, the convergence of past pain and present crisis. "The child, is she very ill?" She couldn't bring herself to articulate the fear that gripped her. Sarah, her face streaked with frozen tears and city grime, nodded numbly, her gaze fixed on this apparition of wealth and concern. "It's Lily," she managed, her voice hoarse. "She's so sick. It's APLM." There it was again. APLM. Eleanor closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, a wave of dizzying, suffocating emotion washing over her, grief, recognition, a strange, dawning sense of destiny. When she opened them, her gaze, filled with an almost unbearable empathy, was fixed on Lily, then on the small, mended toy soldier Arthur was still cradling in his hand. "My daughter," Eleanor said, her voice a raw whisper, yet it carried with crystalline clarity over the howl of the wind. She had that too. The very same illness. She looked directly at Sarah, a profound, unspoken current of shared grief, of maternal understanding, passing between them in that frozen alley. Her name was Emily. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with fresh tears. Not despair this time, but a stunned, incredulous recognition. The shared diagnosis, the whispered name of that merciless disease, instantly dissolved the immense barriers of class, circumstance, and appearance. In that moment, they were not a billionaire and a homeless woman. They were two mothers, united by the cruelest of bonds, their hearts resonating with the same agonizing frequency of loss and fear. Eleanor then turned her compassionate gaze to Arthur. He was leaning heavily against the damp brick wall now, the cold having clearly breached his last defenses. His skin had a grayish, unhealthy pallor, and his teeth chattered audibly, uncontrollably. Yet his eyes, though clouded with exhaustion and suspicion, still held a spark of unwavering, quiet dignity. She saw the deep furrows of hardship etched around them, but also an undeniable wellspring of innate goodness. He had offered his last measure of protection, his very life, without a moment's hesitation. "You, sir," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion that constricted her throat, a profound, overwhelming respect. She reached out, impulsively taking off her own luxurious, fur-lined gloves, and gently took his icy, trembling hands in hers. Her touch was surprisingly firm, warm. "You gave her your coat. You are a hero. What you did," her voice choked, words failing her. The sheer, selfless magnitude of his act was beyond eloquent description. Instead, she gestured to Charles, who, anticipating her need, was already approaching with a thick, cashmere blanket from the car's boot. Eleanor herself took it and gently, reverently, draped it around Arthur's shaking shoulders. "Please," she urged, her voice soft but insistent. You must come with us. You need to get warm immediately. You need medical care, too." Arthur, his mind reeling, buffeted by the whirlwind of the last few minutes, could only stare, then manage a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The sudden enveloping warmth of the thick blanket was a shock to his frozen system, a kindness so unexpected, so overwhelming. It brought a raw, stinging burn to his eyes, as Charles, his expression a mixture of professional concern and deep admiration, gently helped him towards the waiting Rolls-Royce. A single tear, hot and surprising, traced a path to the grime on Arthur's weathered cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, nor of pain. It was a tear of disbelief, of profound gratitude, and perhaps, just perhaps, the fragile, nascent flicker of a hope he thought had been extinguished in him long ago. Inside the hushed, warm sanctuary of the Rolls-Royce, as it carefully, smoothly, pulled away from the curb, leaving the desolate, frozen alleyway and its discarded miseries behind, a profound sense of shared humanity, of miraculous intervention, settled over its unlikely occupants. Eleanor sat beside Sarah, her arm gently around the younger woman's shoulders, while she held Lily's small, chillingly cold hand in hers. The child was still terribly ill, her breathing shallow and labored, but she was no longer exposed to the blizzard's brutal assault. Wrapped in Arthur's coat, and now further cocooned in another soft blanket from the car. "I couldn't save Emily," Eleanor confessed, her voice thick with unshed tears, the words a painful release of a grief long held private, sharing her deepest sorrow with the stranger who, in a matter of minutes, felt like a sister in suffering. The treatments, they simply weren't advanced enough back then, not like they are now. But my Richard, he never gave up. He built a place, the Ainsworth Clinic. The best doctors, the leading research into APLM. We are going there right now. And maybe, just maybe with Richard's legacy, with the brilliant minds he brought together, maybe we can save your Lily." Sarah could only weep great, silent sobs of overwhelming relief and dazed gratitude shaking her thin frame. She leaned into Eleanor, squeezing the older woman's hand, a bond forged in the crucible of shared grief, and now, a sudden, miraculous, unbelievable hope. Eleanor looked across at Arthur. He was huddled beneath his blanket, his eyes closed, still trying to process the dizzying turn of events. As if sensing her gaze, he opened them. His eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw not the hardened cynicism of a man beaten down and discarded by life, but quiet, weary dignity, and the bewildered, profound gratitude of someone who had long ago given up on expecting kindness, only to find it resurrected in its most unexpected and powerful manifestation. The journey to the clinic was made in a near-reverent silence, broken only by Lily's faint, rasping coughs and Sarah's soft, cathartic sobs. The city, just moments before a landscape of cold indifference and brutal struggle, now seemed to hold a fragile, luminous glimmer of promise, all because one freezing, forgotten veteran had chosen, without hesitation, to give his last coat to a dying child. Lily was admitted to the Ainsworth Pediatric Research Clinic, a state-of-the-art facility. Within minutes of their arrival, a dedicated team of specialists, world-renowned in their field, the very team Richard had so painstakingly assembled with such passionate hope, descended upon her, working with an urgent, quiet, focused efficiency. The diagnosis was swiftly confirmed. Severe APLM, complicated by pneumonia and hypothermia. The prognosis was guarded. The battle ahead would be fierce and long, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah felt a tangible sliver of hope pierce through her suffocating despair. Lily was no longer alone in her fight, and neither, she realized, was she. She had an army of the world's best medical experts by her side, and the unwavering, compassionate support of a woman who understood her deepest pain in a way no one else possibly could. Eleanor did not simply sign a few papers and retreat to her mansion. The encounter in the snow, Arthur's profound sacrifice, Lily's innocent suffering had reawakened something vital, something essential within her. She stayed at the clinic, a constant, reassuring presence by Sarah's side, offering not just the vast financial resources of the foundation, but genuine comfort, shared cups of coffee in the sterile waiting room, and a listening ear. She found a new, profound purpose in actively spearheading her late husband's foundation, no longer as a detached administrator going through the motions, but as a fiercely passionate advocate, her heart and soul fully engaged. She now embodied Richard's vision, his unwavering drive, fueled by her own deeply personal motivation. The gleaming halls of the clinic, once just buildings bearing her husband's name, became vibrant places of active hope, of tangible, life-altering impact for her. And Arthur was not forgotten. He was a hero, and Eleanor treated him as such. She ensured he received immediate and thorough medical attention for severe hypothermia and frostbite he had suffered. She arranged for him to have a warm, safe, private room in a clean, quiet guest house run by one of the Foundation's community outreach programs. But more than just shelter and medical care, she offered him dignity, respect, and a future. Recognizing the quiet strength, the profound integrity, and the inherent kindness that lay beneath his weathered exterior, she offered him a job, a position helping at one of the Foundation's shelters for the homeless, a role where his own lived experiences, his empathy, and his quiet wisdom could bring comfort and understanding to others walking a path he knew so well. For the first time in decades, Arthur felt seen, truly seen. He felt valued, respected. He was no longer invisible, no longer a forgotten casualty. The simple, selfless act of giving away his last coat, an act born from the deepest, purest well of his humanity, had not only saved a child from the immediate mortal threat of the storm, but had also, miraculously, set in motion a chain of events that brought light, warmth, and profound healing into the darkest, most frozen corners of 3 disparate lives. The city, eventually, shrugged off the blizzard's icy grip. The snow melted, the streets cleared, and life, for most of its inhabitants, returned to its familiar, relentless rhythms. But for Eleanor Ainsworth, for Sarah and her recovering daughter Lily, and for Arthur, the veteran who had found his way back from the cold, nothing would ever be quite the same. A sacred, unbreakable connection had been forged in the heart of that ferocious storm, a luminous testament to the extraordinary, transformative power of a single, unhesitating act of kindness. It was a story whispered in the corridors of the clinic, a story that warmed the hearts of all who heard it, a potent reminder that even in the deepest, darkest depths of winter, when all seems lost and frozen beyond hope, the incandescent warmth of human compassion can spark a flame, illuminating unforeseen paths to healing, to purpose, to connection, and to a renewed, unshakable faith in the quiet, often overlooked, and profoundly beautiful goodness that resides within the human spirit. The last coat, given by a freezing veteran, had become a radiant cloak of hope, warming not just one dying child, but everyone it touched, proving once again that the most profound and lasting miracles often begin with the simplest, most courageous gestures of love.